On a crisp autumn morning in Boston, Sarah Mitchell hurried into her favorite coffee shop, Maple Corner Cafe, clutching her medical textbooks. The smell of fresh coffee and warm pastries filled the air as she made her way to the counter. At 23, she was in her final year of medical school, following the path her wealthy parents had chosen for her since childhood. As she waited for her usual order of vanilla latte, Sarah noticed that her regular barista wasn't there. Instead, a tall, broad-shouldered man with kind eyes and a warm smile stood behind the counter. His name tag read Marcus. "Rough morning?" Marcus asked, noticing the dark circles under her eyes. His voice was deep and friendly, carrying a hint of genuine concern that made Sarah pause. "Is it that obvious?" She laughed, running a hand through her long brown hair. "Medical school doesn't leave much time for sleep." Marcus skillfully prepared her drink, adding an extra shot of espresso. "On the house," he said, sliding the cup across the counter. "Looks like you need it more than most." Sarah thanked him, surprised by the simple gesture of kindness. As she turned to leave, she nearly collided with another customer, causing her heavy textbooks to scatter across the floor. Marcus quickly came around the counter to help her gather them. "These books look heavy enough to build a house with," he joked, stacking them neatly. Sarah noticed his strong hands were slightly rough, the hands of someone who worked hard for a living. Over the next few weeks, Sarah found herself looking forward to her morning coffee runs. She learned that Marcus wasn't actually a barista. He was helping his aunt, who owned the cafe, while also running his own small auto repair shop a few blocks away. He worked at the cafe during morning rush hours to help his aunt, who had recently injured her hip. What started as casual conversations over coffee soon turned into longer chats. Sarah discovered that Marcus had a sharp mind for business and a dream of expanding his auto shop into a chain. He'd started working on cars when he was just 14, learning from his father who had passed away 2 years ago. "Life's too short to wait for things to happen," Marcus told her one morning. "You've got to build your own dreams." Sarah found herself drawn to his determination and positive outlook. Despite coming from different worlds, her from the wealthy suburbs of Cambridge and him from the working-class neighborhoods of Dorchester, they shared similar values and dreams. One rainy evening, as Sarah was leaving the library, her car wouldn't start. Remembering Marcus owned an auto shop, she called the number he'd given her. Within 20 minutes, he arrived in his tow truck, rain dripping from his jacket as he examined her car. "Just a dead battery," he assured her. "I can have it fixed in no time." While they waited at his shop for the new battery to be installed, they talked for hours. Sarah learned about his volunteer work teaching basic car maintenance to high school students, and she shared her dream of opening a medical clinic in underserved communities after graduation. "Most people think I'm crazy," she admitted. "My parents want me to join their friend's private practice in the suburbs." "Sometimes the craziest dreams are the ones most worth fighting for," Marcus replied, his eyes meeting hers with understanding. That night marked a turning point in their relationship. They exchanged phone numbers, and soon they were texting daily. Their first official date was a simple picnic in the Boston Common, where they spent hours talking about everything from their favorite books to their hopes for the future. Sarah found herself falling for Marcus's genuine nature and kind heart. He listened when she talked about her pressures at medical school, and she admired how he handled the challenges of running his own business. Their differences in background seemed to fade away when they were together. However, Sarah knew her parents wouldn't approve. They had always been particular about her choice of friends and potential partners, carefully steering her toward people from their own social circle. The thought of introducing Marcus to them made her anxious. She couldn't deny the growing feelings in her heart. As autumn turned to winter, Sarah realized she had never felt so comfortable being herself with anyone before. With Marcus, she didn't have to pretend to be the perfect daughter her parents always wanted. She could just be Sarah, med student, dreamer, and a woman falling in love with someone her family would never accept. Little did she know, the simple choice to walk into Maple Corner Cafe that autumn morning would lead to a storm that would change her life forever. The day Sarah decided to introduce Marcus to her parents started like any other Sunday. The Mitchell family's weekly dinner tradition had been unchanging for years. Served precisely at 6 p.m. in their sprawling Victorian home in Cambridge's most exclusive neighborhood. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she helped Marcus adjust his tie in her car, parked outside her childhood home. He had insisted on wearing his best suit, newly purchased for the occasion, and Sarah's heart swelled at his effort to make a good impression. "You look perfect," she assured him, though her voice shook slightly. "Just remember, my parents can be intense." The massive oak door opened to reveal Elizabeth Mitchell, Sarah's mother, dressed impeccably in designer clothes. Her smile froze when she saw Marcus standing beside her daughter. Sarah noticed her mother's eyes quickly scanning Marcus from head to toe, lingering on his dark skin and well-worn shoes. "Mom, this is Marcus Thompson, the one I told you about," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Marcus, this is my mother, Elizabeth Mitchell." Mrs. Mitchell's greeting was polite but cold, her handshake barely lasting a second. She ushered them inside, where Richard Mitchell, Sarah's father, stood waiting in the formal living room, drink in hand. The room felt suffocating despite its high ceilings. Family portraits lined the walls, generations of Mitchell family members staring down at them. Sarah's father didn't move from his position by the fireplace, forcing Marcus to walk over to him. "Sir, it's a pleasure to meet you," Marcus said, extending his hand. "Sarah has told me so much about you." Richard Mitchell took an uncomfortably long time before shaking Marcus's hand. "Have we met before? Perhaps at the country club?" "No, sir," Marcus replied calmly. "I own Thompson's Auto Repair on Dorchester Avenue." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah watched her mother's eyebrows rise so high they nearly disappeared into her hairline. During dinner, the tension grew thicker with each passing minute. Sarah's parents asked Marcus questions that felt more like an interrogation about his family background, education, and future plans. Each answer seemed to disappoint them more. "And your parents?" Mrs. Mitchell asked, delicately cutting her steak. "What do they do?" "My mother works as a nurse's aide," Marcus answered proudly. "My father passed away 2 years ago, but he taught me everything I know about cars and running a business." "How interesting," Mrs. Mitchell replied, her tone suggesting it was anything but interesting. Mr. Mitchell cleared his throat. "Sarah, dear, didn't Charles Winston ask about you at the hospital fundraiser last week? His father's practice is doing exceptionally well." Sarah felt her face grow hot. "Dad, I'm with Marcus now. I'm not interested in Charles Winston or anyone else." "Don't be ridiculous, Sarah," her father snapped, finally dropping his polite facade. "You need to think about your future, your position in society. This association isn't suitable for someone of your background." Marcus sat quietly, his face composed but his jaw tightening slightly. Sarah reached for his hand under the table. "Mr. Mitchell," Marcus spoke calmly, "I understand your concerns, but I care deeply for your daughter. My background might be different from yours, but my intentions are honest." The week following the disastrous dinner passed in a blur of angry phone calls and tearful arguments. Sarah tried to focus on her medical studies, but her phone kept buzzing with messages from relatives who had heard the news. It seemed her parents had wasted no time spreading their version of events throughout their social circle. On a cold Thursday morning, Sarah's mother appeared unexpectedly at the hospital where Sarah was doing her rotations. Elizabeth Mitchell stood out in her designer coat among the busy hospital corridor, clutching her expensive handbag like a shield. "We need to talk," her mother said, pulling Sarah into an empty waiting room. "Your father and I have made a decision." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. She'd seen that determined look on her mother's face before. It never led to anything good. "We're giving you 1 week," Elizabeth announced, opening her purse and pulling out a thick envelope. "Inside this envelope is a first-class ticket to London. Your father's colleague there has agreed to help transfer your medical studies to their program. You'll have a fresh start, away from distractions." Sarah stared at the envelope, her hands shaking. "Distractions? You mean Marcus?" "Sarah, be reasonable," her mother sighed. "What future do you see with him? He's a mechanic. We're Mitchells. Do you want to throw away generations of family respect? Your father has already had to explain this situation to his partners at the firm." "There's nothing to explain, Mom. I'm dating someone I care about who happens to work with cars and happens to be black. That's it." Elizabeth's face hardened. "If you choose to continue this relationship, you need to understand what you're giving up. Your trust fund, your tuition, your car, your credit cards. Everything will be cut off. No more help with medical school, no inheritance, nothing." Sarah felt the world spin slightly. She'd known this might come, but hearing it stated so coldly made her feel sick. You're really willing to disown your only daughter over this? We're trying to save you from making a terrible mistake, her mother insisted. Think about your future children. Think about your career, the social circles you'll lose access to, the opportunities you'll never have. Sarah looked down at her white coat, the symbol of everything she worked for. Her parents had paid for her education, true, but they hadn't taken the exams for her or spent countless nights studying. That had all been her. I'll figure it out, Sarah said quietly. I'll take loans, work part-time, whatever it takes. Don't be naive. Her mother's voice rose sharply. You have no idea what it's like to struggle. You've never had to worry about money a day in your life. Maybe it's time I learned. Sarah handed the envelope back to her mother. I love Marcus, Mom. He makes me happy. He supports my dreams without trying to control them. Why can't that be enough? Elizabeth's face fell, aging years and moments. So this is your choice? You're choosing him over your family? No, Mom. You and Dad are the ones making this a choice. You're the ones giving an ultimatum. Sarah watched as her mother's shoulders stiffened, the last traces of warmth leaving her face. Very well. You have until the end of the month to remove your things from the house. Anything left will be donated. As her mother walked away, her heels clicking on the hospital floor, Sarah leaned against the wall and let the tears fall. She pulled out her phone and called Marcus. They're cutting me off, she said when he answered. Everything. School, money, all of it. There was a pause on the other end. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Wait for me in the lobby. True to his word, Marcus arrived quickly. He found Sarah sitting in the hospital lobby, still in her white coat, looking lost. Without a word, he sat beside her and took her hand. I can't let you give up everything for me, he said softly. Your education, your family. Sarah turned to face him, her eyes red but determined. I'm not giving up anything that matters. My education, I'll find a way. My family, they're the ones giving up on me. Marcus pulled her close, letting her cry into his shoulder. We'll figure it out together, he promised. I got some savings, and the shop is doing well. We'll make it work. That evening, they sat in Marcus's small apartment, making plans over Chinese takeout. Sarah would need to find a cheaper apartment, apply for loans, maybe pick up weekend work. It wouldn't be easy, but looking at Marcus across the coffee table, she knew she'd made the right choice. Sometimes, she realized, losing everything you thought you needed helps you find everything you really want. #P. The first few months after Sarah's parents cut her off were harder than she had imagined. She moved into Marcus's one-bedroom apartment in Dorchester, trading her spacious room in Cambridge for a cramped space where they barely had room to turn around. But somehow, they made it work. Sarah's first taste of real financial struggle came when she had to apply for student loans. Sitting in the financial aid office, staring at the mounting numbers, she felt her chest tighten with anxiety. The counselor looked at her sympathetically as she explained her situation. It's going to be a lot of debt, the counselor warned, but with your academic record, we can make it work. Meanwhile, Marcus worked longer hours at his auto shop, often coming home well after midnight, his hands stained with grease despite thorough washing. He never complained, but Sarah could see the exhaustion in his eyes. One night, she found him at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers and receipts, his face troubled as he worked on the shop's accounts. We're going to need to make some changes, he said, looking up at her. I've been thinking about expanding the business. There's this course on advanced automotive systems I want to take. If I can get certified for high-end cars, we could charge more. Sarah sat beside him, looking at the numbers. I could pick up some weekend shifts at the hospital coffee shop, she offered. Every little bit helps, right? Marcus started to protest, but Sarah stopped him. We're in this together, remember? As winter turned to spring, they fell into a rhythm. Sarah attended classes during the day and worked evenings at the hospital coffee shop. Marcus took his certification courses on Sundays and worked extended hours during the week. They rarely saw each other except late at night, when they'd share cheap takeout and talk about their dreams. The apartment became their sanctuary. They furnished it with second-hand finds and items from yard sales. Sarah learned to cook simple meals to save money, though her first attempts often ended with them laughing over burnt offerings and ordering pizza instead. Their love grew stronger through the struggles. When Sarah passed her medical board exams, Marcus surprised her with a small celebration, complete with a cake he'd saved up to buy from her favorite bakery. When Marcus earned his certification for luxury vehicles, Sarah treated him to dinner at a modest restaurant, using her entire week's tips. 1 year into their new life, things began to change. Marcus's investment in advanced certification paid off as wealthy clients started bringing their expensive cars to his shop. Sarah's excellent performance at school earned her a small merit scholarship. They weren't rich by any means, but they were making it. Their circle of friends changed too. Sarah's old college friends gradually drifted away, uncomfortable with her new lifestyle, but they found new friends, other young couples struggling to build their dreams, who didn't care about designer labels or family connections. Marcus's family, especially his mother Rose, embraced Sarah completely. Sunday dinners at Rose's small house became a weekly tradition, filled with laughter, good food, and genuine warmth. Rose taught Sarah old family recipes and treated her like the daughter she never had. "You've got grit, girl," Rose told her one Sunday, watching Sarah help with the dishes. Not everyone would choose love over luxury. The comment brought tears to Sarah's eyes. "Sometimes I miss them," she admitted, thinking of her parents. "But then I remember how they treated Marcus, and the hurt comes back." Rose hugged her tightly. "Family isn't always blood, honey. Family is love." One evening, as they sat on their small balcony watching the sunset, Marcus turned to Sarah. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Choosing this life?" Sarah looked around at their humble home, thought about their struggles and triumphs over the past year. She thought about the way Marcus supported her dreams, how he believed in her even when things got tough. "Never," she replied honestly. "We might not have much, but what we have is real." Marcus squeezed her hand, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the city lights come alive. They had learned that love wasn't about grand gestures or expensive gifts. It was about supporting each other through late-night study sessions, sharing the last slice of pizza, and believing in each other's dreams. They were building their life together, brick by brick, day by day. It wasn't the life Sarah had been raised to expect, but it was better. It was the life she had chosen. 3 years after Sarah left her family's home, she stood in front of a mirror in Rose's modest bedroom, wearing a simple white dress she'd found at a vintage shop. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the small bouquet of wildflowers. A far cry from the elaborate wedding she'd once imagined as a little girl. "You look beautiful, baby," Rose said, fixing Sarah's veil. Marcus's mother had become the maternal figure Sarah desperately needed. Like an angel. The wedding was being held in Rose's backyard, transformed by Marcus's cousins with string lights and homemade decorations. Paper lanterns swayed in the gentle breeze, and folding chairs lined the makeshift aisle created between Rose's prized rose bushes. Sarah peeked through the window at the gathering guests, mostly Marcus's large extended family, some friends from the hospital where she now worked as a resident, and regulars from Marcus's auto shop who had become like family over the years. "I wish," Sarah started, then stopped herself. Rose knew what she meant without her finishing the sentence. No one from the Mitchell family had responded to the wedding invitations Sarah had hopefully sent. "Their loss," Rose said firmly, adjusting Sarah's hair. "You got plenty of family here who love you for exactly who you are." The ceremony was simple but filled with love. Marcus stood under an arch of flowers, wearing a suit he'd saved months to buy, his eyes filling with tears as Sarah walked down the aisle. Instead of her father, Sarah was escorted by Rose's brother James, who had taken both Sarah and Marcus under his wing over the years. Their vows were personal and honest. Marcus spoke about finding love over a cup of coffee, about watching Sarah fight for their relationship against all odds. Sarah talked about learning what real love meant, not the superficial kind she'd grown up with, but the kind that survived hardship and grew stronger. "I promise to love you through broken-down cars and night shifts," Marcus said, making their guests laugh. "Through student loan payments and burnt dinners." "I promise to stand by you through every dream and every struggle," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite her tears. "To build our life together, no matter what challenges come our way." During the reception, held right there in the backyard, everyone pitched in. Marcus's aunts had cooked mountains of food, friends brought potluck dishes, and someone's cousin played DJ with a borrowed speaker system. Children ran between the tables, and older relatives shared stories about Marcus as a boy. The first dance wasn't to a traditional wedding song, but to the same jazz tune that had been playing in the coffee shop the morning they met. Sarah rested her head on Marcus's shoulder, remembering how far they'd come. "No regrets?" Marcus whispered, holding her close. "Only that we didn't do this sooner," Sarah replied, smiling up at him. As the evening progressed, Rose pulled Sarah aside to give her a small box. Inside was a delicate silver necklace with a tiny heart pendant. "It was my grandmother's," Rose explained, helping Sarah put it on. "She came to this country with nothing but hope and love. Reminds me of you, fighting for what matters most." The moment was interrupted by a commotion near the garden gate. Sarah turned to see her mother standing there, looking uncertain and out of place in her expensive clothes. The music seemed to fade as Elizabeth Mitchell took a hesitant step forward. She carried a small gift, wrapped in silver paper. Sarah felt Marcus's hand on her shoulder, steady and supportive as always. "Do you want me to ask her to leave?" he whispered. After a moment's thought, Sarah shook her head. "No," she said softly. "It's a day for family, all family." Elizabeth didn't stay long. She hugged Sarah awkwardly, whispered congratulations, and left the gift, a pair of pearl earrings Sarah had admired as a child. It wasn't forgiveness or acceptance, not yet, but it was a tiny crack in the wool between them. As the night drew to a close, Sarah and Marcus danced one last time under the stars. Around them, their chosen family cleared tables and packed leftovers, laughing and sharing stories. "Thank you," Sarah said to her new husband, "for showing me what real love looks like." Marcus kissed her softly. "Thank you for being brave enough to choose it." They might not have had the fancy country club reception her parents had once planned, but as Sarah looked around at the joy-filled faces of their guests, she knew this wedding was perfect. It was real, just like their love, built on a foundation stronger than money could buy. 5 years into their marriage, Sarah and Marcus's lives had transformed in ways they never expected. Marcus's auto repair shop, once a small struggling business, had grown into one of Boston's most respected luxury car service centers. His dedication to learning advanced automotive systems and his honest business practices had earned him a loyal clientele of high-end customers. One morning, as Marcus walked through his expanded shop floor, now employing 6 other mechanics, he couldn't help but smile at how far they'd come. The shop had grown from a tiny 2-bay garage to a state-of-the-art facility with the latest diagnostic equipment. He even added a comfortable waiting area with premium coffee, a touch inspired by the coffee shop where he'd met Sarah. "Boss," called Tommy, one of his senior mechanics, "that new Ferrari just came in. The owner specifically requested you to handle it." Marcus nodded, remembering when such cars would have been an impossible dream to work on. Now, exotic car owners sought him out by name. Meanwhile, Sarah had completed her residency and was making waves in the medical community. Her dedication to serving underprivileged communities had caught the attention of hospital administration. She'd recently been offered a position to head a new community health initiative, focusing on providing quality health care to underserved neighborhoods. Their financial struggles had gradually eased. Sarah had finally paid off her student loans, and Marcus's business was thriving. They'd moved from their tiny apartment to a modest but comfortable house in a friendly neighborhood, complete with a small garden that Rose helped them tend. One evening, as they sat in their new kitchen, Sarah shared some unexpected news. "Remember that empty building near your shop?" she asked, pushing a folder across the table. "I've been looking into it. It would be perfect for a community clinic." Marcus leafed through the business proposal she'd prepared. "This is impressive," he said, noting the detailed plans. "But can we afford it?" Sarah grinned. "That's the thing. The hospital is willing to partner with us. They've seen the success of our outreach programs. They'll provide most of the funding if I agree to oversee the clinic." Marcus stood up and hugged her tightly. "Dr. Mitchell Thompson's community clinic," he said proudly, "has a nice ring to it." Their personal life was flourishing too. They created their own traditions, Sunday brunches with Rose, monthly game nights with friends, and quiet evenings in their backyard garden. Their home had become a gathering place for both their chosen family and new friends. One Saturday morning, as Sarah tended to their small vegetable garden, another skill Rose had taught her, she heard familiar voices from next door. Their neighbors' children, whom they often babysat, were calling out to her. "Dr. Sarah, can we help with the tomatoes?" Sarah smiled, watching the children carefully water the plants. She and Marcus had been talking about starting their own family, now that they were finally financially stable. The thought no longer scared her like it once had. Later that day, Marcus came home with exciting news of his own. He'd been approached about opening a second location for his shop. "It's a great opportunity," he explained, spreading out the proposal on their dining table. The new location would focus on teaching automotive skills to young people from disadvantaged backgrounds, like a training program combined with a working shop. Sarah watched her husband's eyes light up as he described his vision. This was the man her parents had once dismissed as just a mechanic, now a successful business owner who never forgot his roots and wanted to help others climb up too. That evening, they sat on their back porch, a habit they'd maintained since their early days in the tiny apartment. The garden lights twinkled, and the air was filled with the scent of roses, gifted roses. "Sometimes I can't believe how far we've come," Sarah mused, leaning against Marcus. "Remember when we used to count pennies for pizza?" Marcus chuckled, pulling her closer. "And now look at us, planning clinics and training programs." Their success hadn't changed who they were at heart. They still lived modestly compared to Sarah's old social circle, but their life was rich in ways money couldn't buy. They had purpose, love, and the satisfaction of building something meaningful together. As they sat there planning their future, neither could have predicted the phone call that would soon change everything, a call that would test their strength in ways they never expected. Sarah was in the middle of reviewing patient files at her new community clinic when her phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something made her answer it instead of letting it go to voicemail as she usually did during work hours. "Mrs. Mitchell Thompson?" an official voice asked. "This is Nurse Roberts from Massachusetts General Hospital. I'm calling about your father, Richard Mitchell. He's been admitted after suffering a severe stroke." The world seemed to stop for a moment. Sarah gripped her desk, her mind racing with memories of the last time she'd seen her father, at that disastrous dinner 7 years ago. "Is he?" Sarah couldn't finish the sentence. "He's stable but critical," the nurse explained. "Your mother asked us to contact you. She said you're a doctor now." Sarah's throat tightened. After years of silence, her mother had acknowledged her career. She quickly gathered her things, telling her staff she had a family emergency. During the drive to the hospital, Sarah called Marcus. He answered immediately, the sounds of his busy shop in the background. "I'll meet you there," he said without hesitation after she explained. "You shouldn't face this alone." The hospital corridors felt different when you were family instead of staff. Sarah found herself walking slower, her heart pounding as she approached the IQ. Outside her father's room, she saw her mother. Elizabeth Mitchell looked nothing like the proud, perfectly put-together woman Sarah remembered. Her hair was gray now, her face lined with worry, and her designer clothes looked rumpled from hours of sitting in hospital chairs. "Sarah," her mother whispered, standing up shakily. "You came." "Of course I came," Sarah replied, surprised by the emotion in her own voice. "He's still my father." They stood awkwardly for a moment before Elizabeth gestured to the room. "He's been asking for you. When he can speak, he keeps saying your name." Sarah stepped into the room, her medical training warring with her emotions as she took in the sight of her father. Richard Mitchell, once so powerful and intimidating, lay connected to monitors and tubes, his right side visibly weakened by the stroke. His eyes flickered open as she approached, and Sarah saw recognition there. He tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come properly. "Don't try to talk, Dad," Sarah said softly, taking his hand. "I'm here now." A tear rolled down his cheek, something Sarah had never seen before. His hand squeezed hers weakly. Marcus arrived shortly after, still in his work clothes. To Sarah's surprise, her mother didn't object when he entered the room. Instead, Elizabeth looked at him with something like desperate hope. "The doctors," she said quietly to Marcus, "they say he'll need extensive rehabilitation. Sarah says you've made your shop successful. I don't suppose you could help us find someone good. Money is—" She trailed off, looking embarrassed. Sarah and Marcus exchanged shocked looks. Then Marcus understood. The Mitchells had lost their fortune. The subtle signs were there. Elizabeth's outdated designer bag, the worry about rehabilitation costs, the absence of private nurses. "Mom," Sarah said gently, "What happened?" Elizabeth sank into a chair, looking defeated. "The market crashed. Bad investments. Your father, he tried to keep the firm alive, but—" She gestured helplessly. "We had to sell everything. The house, the cars, my jewelry. We live in a small condo now." Sarah felt Marcus's hand on her shoulder, steady and supportive as always. She thought about all the lessons life had taught her since choosing love over luxury, about what really mattered, about true strength, about family. "We'll help," Sarah said firmly. "I know the best rehabilitation specialists in the city. And Marcus, we have a wheelchair-accessible apartment above the new shop location," Marcus added. "It's almost ready. They could stay there during his recovery." Elizabeth looked up at them, tears streaming down her face. "After how we treated you both, why would you help us?" "Because that's what family does," Sarah replied, the words she'd learned from Rose coming naturally now. "And maybe it's time we all remembered what family really means." As if to emphasize her point, her father's monitors showed his heart rate calming at the sound of their voices. His hand remained clasped in Sarah's, while his eyes moved between her and Marcus, trying to communicate what his voice couldn't. In that sterile hospital room, surrounded by beeping machines, the walls built by pride and prejudice began to crack. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. A year after Richard Mitchell's stroke, the backyard of Sarah and Marcus's home was filled with laughter and celebration. Colorful balloons bobbed in the gentle spring breeze as family and friends gathered to celebrate their daughter Sophia's first birthday. The birthday girl, with her mother's smile and her father's kind eyes, sat in her high chair, fascinated by the chocolate cake in front of her. Around her, two very different families had come together in a way that once seemed impossible. Richard Mitchell, now using a walker but steadily improving, sat in a comfortable chair near the grill where Marcus was cooking. The two men had developed an unexpected bond during Richard's rehabilitation. Every morning, Richard would come down to the shop, sit in his designated chair, and watch Marcus work, occasionally offering business advice that proved surprisingly valuable. Elizabeth, wearing a simple sundress instead of her once signature designer clothes, helped Rose arrange food on the tables. The two grandmothers had formed their own unlikely friendship during the months the Mitchells stayed in the apartment above Marcus's shop. "Remember when Sophia said her first word?" Elizabeth said to Rose, arranging cupcakes. "Both of us claiming she said grandma first?" Rose laughed, adjusting the tablecloth. "That child is clever. She knew exactly how to get double the cookies from both of us." Sarah watched this scene from the porch, remembering how different things had been just a year ago. The birth of Sophia had been a turning point. When Elizabeth held her granddaughter for the first time, tears streaming down her face, she had turned to Sarah and finally said the words that needed to be said. "I'm so sorry," she had whispered. "We were so wrong about everything. Can you ever forgive us?" The healing hadn't been instant or easy. There were still awkward moments, still times when old hurts surfaced. But they worked through them, one day at a time, united by their love for the little girl who had her father's curly hair and her mother's determination. Marcus came up behind Sarah, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Penny for your thoughts, Dr. Mitchell Thompson." "Just thinking about how life comes full circle," she replied, leaning back against him. "Look at my father teaching the kids how to play chess." Indeed, Richard had set up his chess set on a small table, patiently explaining the game to several children, including some from the neighborhood. His speech, though still slightly slurred, had improved dramatically, especially when talking about his new passion for teaching. The community clinic Sarah had dreamed of was now a reality, serving hundreds of families. Richard, looking for purpose in his retirement, had started volunteering there, using his business skills to help manage the administrative side. Elizabeth had found her own way to contribute, organizing fundraising events for the clinic with the same enthusiasm she had once devoted to country club gatherings. She brought a different perspective to their outreach efforts, helping them connect with donors who might have otherwise overlooked a community health center. Marcus's auto shop had expanded to 3 locations, each with a training program for young mechanics. The Mitchells' financial advice, born from their own experiences with both success and failure, had helped him grow the business sustainably. "Cake time," Rose called out, and everyone gathered around little Sophia. As they sang happy birthday, Sarah looked at the faces around her. Marcus's cousins chatting with her old college friends, her father teaching neighborhood kids chess, her mother and Rose sharing grandmother duties. Marcus's employees who had become like family, all united in celebration. Sophia smashed her hands into the cake, spreading chocolate frosting everywhere and giggling delightedly. Both grandmothers rushed to clean her up, bumping into each other and laughing. You know, Richard said quietly to Sarah as they watched the scene, losing everything helped me find what I'd been missing all along. Real family doesn't care about bank accounts or social status. Sarah squeezed her father's hand. Better late than never, Dad. As the party continued into the evening, with string lights twinkling overhead just like at their wedding, Sarah and Marcus danced slowly on the patio. Sophie had fallen asleep in her grandfather's lap while he told her stories about her mother as a little girl. We did good, Marcus said, holding Sarah close. Really good. Sarah looked around at their mixed, matched, imperfect, wonderful family, built not on wealth or status, but on love, forgiveness, and acceptance. No, she corrected him softly, we did perfect. And in that moment, under the stars, surrounded by the family they had lost and found and built together, they were exactly where they were meant to be.